The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of whispers as Judge Marcus Langley adjusted his robe and glared down from the bench. Known for his backroom deals and a history of bending the law for the powerful, Langley had one goal today: put Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett behind bars. Jasmine, sitting at the defense table in a sharp navy suit, barely blinked as the judge slammed his gavel. Her reputation as a fierce advocate had followed her into every room she entered, but Langley believed she was out of her league in his courtroom. "Miss Crockett," Langley sneered, "you stand accused of obstruction of justice and contempt of court. How do you plead?" Jasmine rose slowly, a calm confidence radiating off her. "Not guilty, Your Honor." "And if I may," she added with a knowing smile, "I move for an immediate dismissal on the grounds of judicial bias." The courtroom gasped. Langley's face flushed deep red. "This is my courtroom, Miss Crockett," he barked. "You don't dictate proceedings here." "With respect, Your Honor," Jasmine said smoothly, stepping forward, "your financial ties to the plaintiff's law firm are public record." "Shall I submit the bank statements into evidence?" Murmurs exploded from the gallery. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Langley's mouth opened and closed, searching for words. Jasmine continued, stacking printed emails and transaction records onto the evidence table like a dealer laying down a royal flush. "I believe Rule 2.11 of the Judicial Code of Conduct requires recusal when impartiality is questioned," she said, her voice steady. "You are legally obligated to remove yourself from this case." Langley banged his gavel again, but the power behind the sound was gone. Jasmine locked eyes with him, unflinching, unafraid. He was beginning to realize he wasn't dealing with an ordinary defendant. Langley leaned back, sweat dotting his forehead. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair as Jasmine pulled out a thin, leather-bound book, a copy of the American Bar Association's Model Rules of Professional Conduct. She turned to the audience. "Let's review, shall we?" Page by page, she dismantled the judge's credibility, citing cases, quoting precedents, and cross-referencing statutes faster than the court reporter could type. Every point hit like a hammer striking an anvil. The prosecutor tried to object, but Jasmine was ready. "Objection noted and overruled by case law you should have cited," she said, smirking as she slid a case file across the table. Langley's usual trick saw cutting off defense arguments, intimidating witnesses, banding procedure crumbled in the face of her airtight knowledge. For the first time in his career, he was defenseless. Finally, Jasmine delivered the final blow. Under 28 U.S.C. Section 455, "I am formally requesting a judicial inquiry into your conduct. And I've already contacted the Judicial Review Board. They're listening right now." Langley froze. Hidden in the gallery were two members of the review board, quietly observing the proceedings. Jasmine had outmaneuvered him from the start. Knowing he was cornered, Langley had no choice. "In light of new evidence," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper, "this case is dismissed." A roar of applause erupted from the gallery. Jasmine, calm as ever, simply gathered her papers and turned toward the exit. But just before she left, she glanced over her shoulder at the broken man slumped behind the bench. "Next time," she said, voice sharp enough to cut through steel, "know your opponent before you try to cheat the game." And with that, Jasmine Crockett, a legal genius, fearless fighter, walked out of the courtroom, her legend only growing stronger. The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of whispers as Judge Marcus Langley adjusted his heavy black robe and glared down from the bench. His reputation had long been cemented as a man who could be bought. A few campaign donations here, a discreet favor there, and today, he intended to remind everyone who held the real power. He had one goal in mind: crush Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and make an example out of her. In Langley's mind, Jasmine was a threat, not because she had broken the law, but because she hadn't bowed to the powers that be. Unlike the usual political figures who came through his courtroom, she wasn't scared. She didn't play by the unspoken rules. She was vocal, defiant, and worst of all, she knew the law better than most of the judges who presided over her. But Langley believed that here, under his gavel, even she could be broken. The bailiff barked, "All rise." As Langley entered, but Jasmine barely moved, rising only as a courtesy, her chin lifted slightly higher than necessary. As she sat back down, her attorney gave her a worried glance, but she waved him off with a small, almost imperceptible smile. She knew exactly what was coming. "Miss Crockett," Langley sneered from the bench, savoring every syllable. "You stand accused of obstruction of justice and contempt of court. How do you plead?" The charges were joke manufactured nonsense stemming from Jasmine refusing to comply with a politically motivated subpoena. It was clear to everyone who was paying attention, this wasn't about justice. It was about silencing her. Jasmine rose slowly, deliberately, letting the tension build. She wore a navy blue suit that made her look both professional and formidable, her natural poise making the polished mahogany courtroom seem cheap by comparison. "Not guilty, Your Honor," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the murmuring crowd like a razor. "And if I may," she added, a glint of something mischievous in her eyes, "I move for an immediate dismissal on the grounds of judicial bias." A ripple of gasps swept across the room. Langley's lips twitched into an angry smile, the kind a predator gives when its prey tries to fight back. "You dare challenge the integrity of this court?" he growled. "With respect, Your Honor," Jasmine said, her tone razor-sharp yet calm, "your financial ties to the plaintiff's law firm are a matter of public record. Shall I submit the bank statements and email communications into evidence for the court's review?" There was a moment of stunned silence. Even the court stenographer paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Langley's face flushed an angry red. His hands, thick with veins, gripped the sides of his chair. The prosecutor, seated at his table, shifted nervously, clearly caught off guard. Jasmine watched it all with a slight tilt of her head, as if examining the first cracks forming in a dam. "Preposterous," Langley barked, banging his gavel hard enough that it echoed off the walls. "Irrelevant. You're grasping at straws." Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly walked to the evidence table, laying down a neat stack of documents with the precision of a surgeon. Bank transactions, personal emails, correspondence between Langley's campaign committee and the law firm pushing the case against her. She turned back to him, locking eyes. "I believe Rule 2.11 of the Judicial Code of Conduct is quite clear. A judge shall disqualify himself in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned." The murmurs grew louder. A woman in the gallery whispered loudly enough for several people to hear, "She's right." Langley tried to speak, but his mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish pulled out of water. His usual bag of tricks, intimidation, sarcasm, veiled threats, none of it was working. "I request a hearing on the matter of your conflict of interest," Jasmine continued, "unless, of course, you would prefer to voluntarily recuse yourself before formal proceedings begin." Langley slammed his gavel again, but it sounded hollow this time, more desperate than commanding. "This is my courtroom, Miss Crockett," he snarled, pointing a thick finger at her. "And you will show proper respect." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Jasmine said, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips, "respect is earned, not demanded. And when a judge violates the principles of impartial justice, it is my duty, no, it is every citizen's duty, to call it out." The courtroom was electric now, buzzing with energy. People craned their necks to get a better look at the woman who dared to challenge the throne. Langley leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking every bit his age. The grand puppet master, exposed under the harsh spotlight of truth. Still trying to regain control, he nodded to the prosecutor. "Proceed," he said tightly. The prosecutor rose hesitantly, flipping through his notes, but it was clear he was rattled. Jasmine watched him with a mixture of amusement and pity. He wasn't the real enemy. He was just a pawn in Langley's crumbling empire. As the prosecutor stumbled through his opening remarks, Jasmine casually pulled a slim, leather-bound book from her briefcase and placed it neatly on the table, a copy of the American Bar Association's Model Rules of Professional Conduct. The message was clear: she came prepared for a fight, and she came to win. Langley watched her with a growing sense of dread gnawing at the pit of his stomach. For the first time in years, he realized he had made a critical miscalculation. Jasmine Crockett was no ordinary defendant. She was a legal juggernaut, and she had just fired the first shot in a battle he was woefully unprepared to fight. Langley leaned back in his chair, sweat gathering at his temples despite the coolness of the courtroom. His gavel rested in his hand, but he didn't dare strike it again, not after Jasmine Crockett had turned his courtroom into her arena. He watched helplessly as Jasmine pulled the slim, leather-bound book closer to her, her fingers gliding over its surface like a concert pianist about to deliver a masterpiece. "Let's review," she said calmly, addressing not just the judge, but the entire courtroom. She flipped open the book, finding her page without even glancing down, and began to speak with the clarity and authority that demanded attention. According to the American Bar Association's Model Rules of Professional Conduct, Section 1.7 states that a conflict of interest, a real or perceived, fundamentally compromises judicial integrity. Furthermore, Section 2.11 of the Judicial Code mandates that any judge with a financial interest connected to a party in a case must immediately recuse themselves. She turned her gaze to Langley, her voice rising just enough to ensure every word hit its mark. "I have documented evidence which has been entered into the record that you received donations exceeding permissible limits from the very law firm representing the plaintiff against me. I have bank transfers time-stamped mere weeks before this trial began, and I have email exchanges that suggest coordination between your office and the prosecution." The prosecutor tried to object, standing with a weak objection. But Jasmine didn't even pause. "Objection overruled," she said crisply, before looking over at Langley. "Unless Your Honor would prefer to explain on the record why these financial ties shouldn't be considered relevant." Langley's mouth pressed into a thin, bloodless line. The prosecutor sat back down, defeated. In the gallery, people whispered urgently to one another. Two men in suits, previously unnoticed at the back of the courtroom, exchanged nods. They weren't reporters or spectators, they were observers from the Judicial Review Board. Jasmine had known they would be there. She had planned for this moment from the very start. Langley realized it too. His head turned slightly toward them, and in that flicker of a glance, he knew the noose was tightening. Jasmine stepped closer to the bench, her presence commanding. "In accordance with 28 U.S.C. A Section 455, I formally request a judicial inquiry into this court's impartiality. I have already submitted a preliminary complaint to the Judicial Review Board, whose representatives are present here today. Should this court fail to act appropriately, further actions including formal suspension proceedings will be initiated." Langley opened his mouth, but no words came out. His hands, once so steady and powerful, now trembled as they gripped the edges of the bench. The courtroom waited in a heavy, breathless silence. Finally, Langley's voice broke through, thin and hoarse. "In light of new evidence presented," he said, struggling to maintain a shred of dignity, "this case is dismissed." Effective immediately. A beat of silence. Then the courtroom erupted, a spontaneous explosion of cheers and applause. Even some of the court officers exchanged glances of awe and respect. Jasmine didn't bask in it. She didn't raise her arms in triumph or smile for the cameras. She calmly gathered her papers, placed them back into her briefcase, and gave a polite nod to her team. To her, this wasn't victory, it was justice served, plain and simple. As she walked toward the doors, she paused, turning back one final time to look at Langley, now a shattered man, his legacy crumbling around him. "Next time," she said, her voice low but firm enough to cut across the chaos, "know your opponent before you try to rig the game." Langley couldn't respond. He simply slumped in his chair, drowning in the ruins of his own corruption. With quiet, powerful steps, Jasmine Crockett pushed open the heavy courtroom doors and walked into the light, her legend sealed, her future unstoppable.